It's a battle of In the Weeds, attorney Walter Sullivan of Radio Entrepreneurs and me of the Cannabis Multimedia Network. Both of us host shows called In the Weeds. But I guarantee you, the cannabis enthusiast, will be the big winner in this battle because I guarantee we will inform, we will educate, and perhaps even make you smile on the next In the Weeds with Jimmy Young on my Cannabis Multimedia Network. Go to cmn.com live. Don't look now, but it's a whole new world of weed out there. Pot is flower, it's Bruce Banner and Blue Dream. You've got bongs and dabs, resin and shatter, vaping and edibles, new terms, new strains, and new ways to use cannabis sativa, the plant. Some just made with CBD, and hemp has minimal THC. There's sativa and indica strains and 100 chemicals, all legal in 10 states for adult use. There's a lot to get to know. Get used to it, folks, because it's legal in the Bay State and it's not going away. Neither is In the Weeds with Jimmy Young next. Revolutionary Clinics is just one of 49 medical cannabis dispensaries in Massachusetts, but there's a reason why it's one of the most popular. It's their patient-first philosophy. All day long, they teach, they educate, they communicate about this complicated plant called cannabis sativa. That's true whether you visit their Cambridge location in Fresh Pond at 110 Fawcett Street or at 67 Broadway in Somerville. Revolutionary Clinics, where the patient comes first. Welcome to In the Weeds with Jimmy Young, everybody, live here on the Go to CMN, the Cannabis Multimedia Network. I am Jimmy Young, your host. We are often imitated and copied, but never equaled. This podcast is being streamed live on the Cannabis Multimedia Network and my own YouTube channel, which will be rebranded as GoToCMN.com. You can also find this podcast audio only on the CLNSmedia.com website, Audio Boom, and of course the video is also available on the WeedTube.com, which is launching their big app tomorrow, and we'll get into tomorrow in just a moment. By the way, happy 420 weekend. It's the Holy Trinity weekend because we've got Good Friday and Easter, Passover, all surrounding 420, the celebration of a couple of California deadheads who used to get high in the 70s after school at the Louis Pasteur statue and has now become kind of a cult. And on top of that, in Boston, the greatest sports city in America, the Bruins and Celtics are both in the playoffs, both playing at the same times. And yeah, that other team, the team that won the World Series, that Red Sox team, who knows what's going on with them, but they too are playing for the next 20 days. So I'm not sure I can handle the excitement. So I brought in an Irish clone of mine, Walter Sullivan. Hello,
we do
Walter.
Look like twins, don't we? They may have been token a little bit back at the Last Supper too, Jimmy. You never know.
Oh no, I know for sure. I'm sure they were. I mean, let's face it. Back then, they didn't make a big deal about it like they do now.
You think about the weekend, how it's going to play out. Who would have thought two kids at 420 at a statute could go viral the way that's gone viral? Granted, they removed Louis from the whole 420 episode,
right?
But it's amazing. This weekend, kicking off tomorrow at 420. Lyft is offering a 420 discount.
That's right, $4.20 discount
because they don't want you to drive while high.
Right.
Netter is participating in that along with the Chiefs Association. But who would have thought that you would have been able to pick a ride up and save $4.20 because of 420?
Not in my lifetime, to be honest with you, Walter. I mean, I still pinch myself and say, is this really happening in my state, Massachusetts, that they've made it legal and people can walk into a store and walk out with legal cannabis and enjoy it responsibly? Because we all know it is an adult use product and we do want you to use it responsibly.
And it's hard to believe the Pilgrims. What do you think the Pilgrims are saying today if they were up there saying, I thought we moved to a nice Puritan state.
Yeah.
Look at them now. They're like, these people.
They're from the devil. We're crazy people, right?
Would have been burnt at the stake like the witches.
That's right, like the witches from Salem. Should we talk a little bit about your background, Walter Sullivan? Because
we should, because I'm always looking for business. Jimmy.
And you can find him at waltersullivanlaw.com. Correct?
Yes,
that's
very much.
That's
You're
where we
so
can
nice
find
to
you.
me, Jimmy.
Well, no, and I appreciate it. You're from Boston College, you both undergrad and grad. By the way, did you ever have Bob Berry as a professor at BC Law School?
How do you know Bob?
So he was at the Institute in Broadcast Sports with
Sports attorney.
the late David Claytell at BU back in 1979 when I graduated Tufts University. The next day, after I graduated, I was in a classroom from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m.
Were you smoking with him?
No. Not that I know of.
I think
Not that
Bob
I can
might have.
remember. Not that I can
A
remember.
couple of his professors, other professor friends, was token back then, and they're still token now.
I'm not surprised to hear that because, after all, this has been going on for thousands of years. Walter, your background is very interesting because it seems like any kind of adult use fun, alcohol, cannabis, betting, gaming, you're the man.
It's all about highly regulated pleasure. When I worked for government, Jimmy, it was all about highly regulated sin. But we're not committing sin anymore. This is pleasure. And if you do it appropriately, there's no problem with it.
Now, you do a show called In the Weeds on Radio Entrepreneurs.
Everything's about in the weeds today.
It is a very, it's a cliche kind of a name. But when did you start your show? Do you remember when?
I started my show about a year ago, I think 2017.
Oh, you were in 17. That would
Right.
be 2 years ago,
Right,
just
2
for
years
those
ago.
of you who
Well,
are scoring
maybe
at
a
home.
little high, but,
Okay.
But you never know, and the whole show is geared towards entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
And we started to focus on entrepreneurships relative to cannabis. Excuse me, you always correct me about
Yes,
that.
I try to. By the
and-
way, the Globe has an issue with that. We're going to have to discuss that at some point.
And it's such a liberal newspaper. You'd think that they would get it right.
Well, I don't know if it's right or wrong as much as it's not educated. And right now, even federally, when they are looking at the differences between hemp, which I call impotent cannabis, because it only has under 0.3%.
And I know you're not impotent.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Under 0.3% THC, and I'm not going to go there.
We have to keep this show clean, though, right?
Try to keep it clean. We like to do it that way, by the way, because you don't have to check the mark for the adult content or whatever. You have to check that. No, this is for this is definitely a PG rated podcast anyway. And we're right. Where was I going? Because I'm still suffering from post concussion syndrome. I lose my way and my train of thought. But we were talking a little bit about the background you were marijuana, the word. So hemp is one thing. They have 0.3% or under THC, and CBD, the anti-inflammatory chemical that's in the cannabis sativa plant. And then the plant that has the THC in it, they're using the word marijuana as a distinctive term.
Yes, you kind of see that because you look at the cannabis and then they break it down from there from marijuana to hemp.
Right.
And that's really to promote the hemp side, saying we're not marijuana.
I understand, but
even though it's all cannabis,
it's
and that's
the
how it
same
should be.
plant.
And that's how it should be worded.
It's the same plant.
Separated by THC versus CBD, and there's so many different types of CBs that as we get better at this, in being able to extract from the plant,
Right.
the amazing ability that we'll be able to accomplish on a whole bunch of different ailments, and also the idea of how THC works.
Right. And then, of course, the medical community, the cannabis medical community, continues to debate exactly how much THC do you need to get the maximum benefit of the CBD, the anti-inflammatory component, in the plant.
And that is that people don't understand is that you have to have
Something.
a little.
Right.
They set it at 0.30, right? 0.30.
Mm-hmm.
That you have to have some in order for the CBD to activate.
Right.
But you can't get anything from 0.3%. I mean, you look at ginger ale today.
Well,
Ginger ale has alcohol in it,
Hey,
but not enough to be considered alcohol.
right. So wait, go back to that a second, because there are still people who are producing tons of CBD products from industrial hemp, 0.3% or under, and they are getting benefits from those products. Some may be a placebo effect, some may not. Of course, until it's really studied and researched in a clinical trial, it's going to be difficult to tell. But there's so much anecdotal evidence about the use of these products. And I use the Charlotte's Web product every day in my orange juice with my turmeric and all the other stuff I use to try to get rid of my horrible arthritis that I have in my fingers, hands, and necks, and legs, and everywhere else in my body.
This is a PG show.
Yeah, right. I know that's right. That's why I'm keeping it. Those were the body parts I was referring to. But it's the use of the word. They just don't get enough about how derogatory that word can be. And I use an analogy, a racial analogy. The word Negro has disappeared for obvious reasons, and that is similar to what marijuana is looked at. Loosely a slang term. Mexican Americans were brought in, or even Mexicans back in the day in the 1920s and 30s were using it, and they called it evil weed. It was slang for evil weed. And then we get into the DuPonts and the Hearsts and Mr. Harry Anslinger, who, kind of started that whole reefer madness and the prohibition movement back in 1937. And I'm on record, and I have a blog on my website saying in 1937, I really do believe the wrong drug was made illegal.
I mean, let's hit a couple of points here. The last time I was on your show, we discussed the issue of cannabis versus marijuana. And
yes.
It's called the Cannabis Control Commission, not the Marijuana Control
Correct.
Commission. And I mentioned...
They got that right.
And we talked about Cambridge was originally, their zoning ordinance was marijuana.
Yeah.
And during a council meeting, one of the councilors actually raised the issue about, do people understand where the term marijuana came from? And Cambridge specifically changed changed their zoning ordinance to say cannabis, as well as the other ordinances they're working on.
That's good.
You also mentioned something earlier about anecdotal.
Yep.
What I find is amazing, during this whole process, is why I'm getting involved in medical marijuana and retail marijuana, is people bringing up. I don't know if you've ever read Bill Bennett's book about marijuana, cannabis, but for purposes of his use, marijuana.
Okay.
Is a gateway drug.
Yeah.
And I have people holding up the book showing, look at what Bill wrote. When you actually read the book,
yeah, he doesn't say that.
There's no scientific base in it. It's all anecdotal evidence.
Correct.
At least for purposes of cannabis, there is scientific evidence. Now, we're always going to have people disputing that it is not a gateway drug to opiates. In fact,
so is
it's
caffeine.
the reverse.
Right? Is caffeine a gateway drug?
I mean, I tell people...
Isn't caffeine a gateway drug?
I'd argue alcohol, caffeine.
Thank you very much.
And we're both old enough to remember 1974, in which...
One of my favorite years.
A guy... do you remember that year?
Yeah, I do.
Or 75, I should say. Maybe
which is when I graduated high school, I might add.
A guy killed the mayor of San Francisco in complaining that he did it because of Twinkies.
Oh, I love Twinkies, though.
But, we can use any type of thing saying it's a gateway drug.
Right.
But the reality is...
Humans are frail beings.
No,
we are attracted to different things. We are looking for thrills. We're looking for shortcuts. And I'm actually going to segue into an interesting discussion with you about the illegal market, because this is a good time to do that. Although I'm going to back up a little bit. I'm actually going to stick with my script here, and I want to go back.
You have a script, and you're making me do this offhand?
Yeah, I am, because you're the guest, and sometimes it's easier just to follow the host.
Keep me softballs.
Right. Well, no softballs. I want to know what your role was in writing question 4. Were you involved in the writing of the question 4? Were you involved with the writing of the medicinal laws in Massachusetts? Tell me what your role was.
I
moved in.
I was not involved in writing either one.
Okay.
I paid attention to them. I did speak to the people that were writing it, especially on question 4, because the question came up on question 4. I used to run the Alcoholic Beverages Control Commission, as
Gotcha.
you know. And
by the way, should cannabis be under the Alcoholic Beverage Control Commission and federally?
It seems to make sense. We separated out gaming.
Yep.
We separated out cannabis.
Okay.
It's hard to tell. You look at the administrative cost, having all these different groups, there's an administrative cost to that.
Right.
If you put them all together, since they all are highly regulated pleasure,
yep.
Do you save on an administrative cost? The downside is that you don't have as technically responsible group of people. I mean, however anybody feels about the Cannabis Control Commission,
yep.
They're really working hard to try to do the right thing. And
yes,
I forgot now. I'm getting to be like you on my...
See what happens? And you didn't even get in an accident.
But I forgot about where I was going with this.
This happens sometimes when you have cannabis in your brain. It is. You're talking about ABC. I asked about ABC, so I threw you off.
So one of the questions in the petition, it talked about you have to have a minimum of 20% of the amount of Section 15 licenses that you have. But no one ever actually looked at what that meant. And the reason why that's important is that there are 2 types of Section 15 licenses. There's all alcoholic beverages licenses, where you go buy beer, wine, distilled spirits, and so forth.
Yep.
Or there's beer and wine licenses.
Gotcha.
And what the Yes on 4 people were somewhat confused of when they actually got asked by the media, well, how many licenses are we talking about? they didn't actually realize the distinction, and they were saying, well, does it relate to just beer and wine or all alcohol? And when you go back and read the petition, it doesn't distinguish them. So since the petition does not distinguish them, it relates to all Section 15 licenses in a community, whether it's beer and wine or whether it's alcohol, but it has to be issued. And a good example of that is that Cambridge, for example, has 42 or so Section 15 licenses. They've only issued 39, so they're required at a minimum to have 8.
Gotcha.
They plan on having more. They don't know what that number will be, but there's a minimum requirement. And what you find is amazing on that minimum part is you see some of these cities and towns, and they're saying their minimum is their maximum. It's like there's no problem with doing that, but it's the lack of understanding of what this is about.
It's all education.
Everything's education.
Everything's education.
I read things in the newspaper where people are getting up and someone in the audience gets up and argues saying, this is a gateway drug. And then you hear
it's an
the
exit.
Presenter.
Yeah, how about an exit drug now?
Yeah, I mean,
can we explain that to them?
No, but then you're dealing with the presenter saying, look, you're trying to. There's no sense in arguing with the guy because people's perceptions are their reality.
Right.
But I want to go back to the gateway issue, and I think if trying to explain to people, 2.5% of the people can't gamble. 10% of the people can't drink because of alcohol. The number for cannabis is somewhere around there. So gambling isn't for everybody. Alcohol isn't for everybody. And the same thing is true for cannabis because people may have an addictive behavior.
Right.
But what you're trying to explain to people, the distinction between that of an addictive behavior. Do people get addicted? People get addicted to Twinkies. But the distinction.
But there's a physical addiction and then there's a mental dependency.
And that's really what you try to explain.
Right.
That an opiate, it's not about whether you have an addictive behavior. The substance itself is addictive.
Correct.
And
you could say the same thing about caffeine, by the way.
Yes, I love coffee.
Yeah, most Americans do, I might add. And people, when they miss their coffee in the morning, have a physical reaction to that.
Jimmy, what's actually interesting in the sense of that, out of all the substances, there's only one substance you can actually die from withdrawal, if not done with the doctor. That's alcohol. You may feel you're going to die from opiate coming off opiates. You won't.
Yeah.
But alcohol is the only drug. Excuse me, I don't want to call it because that's what substance.
Substance.
That marijuana is not a drug; it's a substance.
And it's grown in the earth. It's a natural weed. Okay, leads me to the next question. Okay, there was actually 2 big things that happened in the last week in business. One is Canopy Holdings of Canada buying Acreage Holdings. And if you aren't familiar with those 2 names...
Did you see what the ex-speaker is going to be getting?
No, but I'm not...
$20 million he's going to make as a result of being involved with Acreage?
Let me ask you a question. Was it a good move getting out of politics? I want to say, he makes a lot more on this, doesn't he?
I want to know what Bill Well's making on it, because Bill Well's involved with it, too.
Yes,
I think that's going to fund his campaign for president.
And you know what? Good luck, Bill Weld, because we like Bill Weld being from Massachusetts. He's one of the few Republican leaders that I actually have a lot of respect for. Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Okay,
we don't want to talk politics.
I know, because usually I do talk about politics and it gets crazy. So, but back to this deal, it seems that Canopy, by acquiring Acreage, is betting on it becoming federally legal. And they're actually, I believe they're actually holding like $300 million or a percentage of it will be paid out when the law changes.
Yeah, because they need it to be federally legal in order for them to complete the purchase.
Complete the purchase, right?
Yes.
And now, you talk about putting pressure on the banking industry, but I mean, isn't that what's driving the bus in Washington, D.C. more than anything else right now?
I find that interesting. If you follow elections,
Yep.
we're not going to get involved in politics.
Yeah.
But if you follow elections, having a good economy helps people get reelected.
Yeah.
And I'm not getting involved.
We have a mixed economy right now.
But that relates whether you're a Democrat or a Republican.
Right. And people do vote with their pocketbooks or their wallets.
Money does not work unless it's put into the system.
Okay.
And so,
there's a lot of money going into this system.
Cannabis is not able to be put into the system because of the federal issue,
right,
which with Congress is working on to try to,
right,
even though it may still be federally illegal, trying to deal with the banking issue because they see the problem. And it's a problem about safety, but it's also a problem that if the funds aren't put into the system
Right. It's just
the community. We can't grow. I
Right.
mean, you look at alcohol when the biggest failure ever was prohibition.
Right.
But big reason for that of bringing it back was the loss of tax dollars.
right. And if they're trying to create tax dollars here in the cannabis side of things too.
So I think
The problem with money, as you know, is greed gets involved with that.
So as you know, Jimmy, I'm a former prosecutor in narcotics and organized crime. And the way I used to tell defendants, you could make all the money you want selling drugs. Try to spend it.
Right.
That's when I get you.
Well, this is what happened, I think, with
And-
the woman down in Milton
right.
too.
Very much
We'll
so.
be
We'll
bringing
talk
up
about that.
Northern Herb in a minute.
But the interesting thing is that when I was a prosecutor, the only people we actually caught are stupid drug dealers
Stupid. I was going to say
or
this.
greedy drug dealers.
Right.
Because we actually did a drug buy. The police officers did not want to really leave the courthouse, so we figured if the guy's stupid enough to show up in the front steps of the courthouse, we'll do the buy.
Yeah.
He shows up.
Of course he did. Because, they don't think, nobody thinks that, they think they've been getting away with it or they're doing it. So I'm going to be able to get away with it here at this address. What's this address? Oh, it says district courthouse, or federal courthouse.
Yeah, who's that?
I wonder who wants it here. Maybe it's a clerk. Oh, oops. Anyway, another interesting note happened last week in business with Bloomberg reporting that there's a chance that cannabis could be traded on the commodity futures market.
It's a commodity.
And it's grown in the ground, right?
It is. I mean, why wouldn't it be?
Yeah, no, it's funny. I have a brother who's an attorney who is.
You don't hold it against him, though, right?
No, in fact, I love him dearly, and he is one of the foremost attorneys on derivatives in the country. So I did happen to bother him after a Celtics game this week so we could talk a little bit about this. And he says, look, it's a commodity. It's grown in the ground. As soon as they can establish what the wholesale price is internationally, then you start to trade it.
Yeah, it's because it hasn't been a legitimate market.
Right.
The market's got to grow and figure out how this plays out. And once it plays out, it's going to be like oranges, it's going to be like tomatoes,
Right.
watermelon, grapes, whatever.
Yep.
It's a commodity that grows in the earth in that it does have a value. And the question on that is when you go to sell and not like we do with other commodities, is that how we put that into the market generates, and we find that with oil coming from the Middle East, is that
Right.
how many barrels are we willing to put out there relative to the pricing?
So, and as you know, as money gets involved, bigger money comes in. We've seen it already in Massachusetts with some of the first dispensaries that opened in Massachusetts have already been absorbed by larger companies. The Globe Spotlight series was trying to showcase this a little bit over the last few weeks. And again, I think they do a great job with journalism over at the Globe, whether you lean left or right. I just think that it's still a very important.
Especially for the most part, especially for the Spotlight team. They truly
Yes.
still are a journalist versus the media in a general sense. And not necessarily the media's fault, is because of the internet and everything else, is that news moves so quickly,
Right.
that you don't have the ability to do the work that a journalist normally would have done to
Right.
get the news out there.
Right. And when you move the deadline around the clock, the deadline, the idea of a deadline disappears. So you're constantly trying to put the story out in whatever shape it is now, and then it's almost like you beg for forgiveness before you ask for
That's right.
permission.
A congressman told me, years ago, the way Congress would float ideas and bills is that they'd put it out there on a Monday, and the way the cycle of the news works, by Friday they'd have a good idea of how the country felt about it.
Right.
And it was a good tool to use. He said today, between blogs and everything else, he
And
said,
tweets and everything that's
we
immediate.
can't, because, as you know, people read something in a newspaper, whether it's or a blog, and they believe it's true.
Right.
And so it's really difficult to gauge
Mm-hmm.
where the population is on an issue.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the social equity question here in liberal Massachusetts, if you will. I think when they brought this in and they wrote the law and they wanted to give an opportunity to those who have been impacted by the laws, breaking the laws, and the people that have been arrested, the people of color, and those who have been really singled out and targeted, and during this war on drugs that I think pretty much everybody recognizes has failed. Let's give them a second chance, or even a first chance to get into this business, without really thinking about how can we do that when people are coming out of prison with records and felonies and, not a lot of education going on in prison. I just want to say we don't do reform. We do punishment in this country, which is another issue we can talk about another day. But point being, they're still struggling with trying to figure out what can happen. And there's no licenses in the city of Boston right now. And there's infighting now in the city of Boston among those who want to have licenses and opportunities. How is this going to get resolved?
Good question. I think, first of all, let's look at the beginning of it.
Yep.
In the beginning of it, they gave a 2-week window
Yeah,
for people to apply. And I don't think it was intent to be wrong. I think they just didn't quite know how to handle it.
Right.
Because don't forget, everyone talks about this law coming into being from the petition.
Mm-hmm.
Reality, the law we have before us today is legislative driven, not the petition.
Right. I get that.
And
But
that's really trying to
the
explain to
impetus
people.
was the petition, though.
But people need to separate out because they're blaming the petition for this is a legislative act.
Right.
And they're looking to do the right thing.
Well,
the problem is they set a window up.
Yep.
And that window is a problem because it didn't work out right. So if you're looking at places like Cambridge and Somerville,
Yep.
What Somerville has done and Cambridge is still working on it is we know the state closed that window too soon. So we're going to take that in on our own. So economic empowerment, social equity applicants can apply in Somerville. Yep. Minorities can apply in Somerville.
Yep.
And they may even take a social equity applicant and find them to be a social equity applicant themselves, plus residents. Cambridge is looking at the same thing, and they're in the process of finalizing. They have their zoning ordinance all set. It goes into effect. What day does it go into effect, Jimmy?
April 20th.
April 20th.
How'd I do?
Perfect, but not at 4:20 at midnight.
Yeah, okay.
But
wait, midnight, the midnight, or is it the 19th at midnight or the 21st at midnight? Which midnight is it?
Well, it depends on how you're feeling that night.
Okay.
But Cambridge is struggling too is about how do we do with this because we want, so they're giving benefits to economic empowerment applicants.
Yep.
They're giving social equity applicants. They're creating 2 tiers.
Yep.
They're giving benefits to women and minority-owned businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Then they have that next tier. And the other tier in a priority applicant is the RMDs, because they're already up and running. The question they're looking at now, so the original proposal had a 2-year window. The council said, we may just do, those are the only applicants we'll accept, is the RMDs in economic empowerment and minority and women-owned. They're still in that process as to where this plays out. Is 2 years enough? Should it be 5? I think you see these 2 communities working hard. You haven't seen that in Boston.
Is it Walsh? Is it because he's so anti-weed or anti-anything because he's had some history with abuse? Has he not?
I don't know if that's – I mean –
something's going on in the city of Boston, and he's the mayor, so I'm pointing the finger at him.
It takes a council –
I understand there's a city council involved.
We'll use that for an example.
Go ahead.
In the sense, so – you read the article, you read the stories about East Boston.
Yeah.
There were actually 3 applicants looking at East Boston.
Yep.
They knocked one out. 2 went forward with a host community agreement that the mayor gave them.
Yep.
And I'd argue that was the right thing to do. The best person wins.
Right.
Let the system figure out, going through special permanent community meetings, figure out who they actually want.
Yep.
Well, the way it worked, whoever came before the zoning board of appeals first is the one that won.
Right.
And the other one didn't. You see the local council all up in arms. Well, wait a minute, because she preferred the other one.
Right.
Well, and you should allow both. Well, guess what? You're the one. You were one of the votes to move the zoning ordinance forward. Don't blame the mayor for giving host community agreements. It's the city that has to look at, and I'll give an example of that in a minute. So the city requires a half-a-mile distance.
Yep.
What Cambridge does, Cambridge requires an 1,800 feet distance between retail establishments.
Yep.
They made an exception. Their original proposal that they had for zoning required a minimum of 1,000 feet for economic empowerment applicants and social equity applicants. They removed that, and now a social equity applicant could be right next door to a general applicant. And the whole idea, because they saw that these distances are causing a problem for these people. So there are, and I shouldn't say these people because that sounds so awful. For social equity applicants.
Yep.
So I think Boston has got to find a way of dealing with it. I think the other issue comes up to be, I won't tell you the district councilor, but he realized, this is coming to be. My community knows it's coming, and I know it's coming. but my community is not quite ready yet. And this is the struggle as we move into this industry. Where is that line? People will get on board, and you'll find communities that we'll call dry right now that will get on board because you look at the tax dollars. But I think you also have an industry rushing to get into business, so everybody's piling up, trying to get licenses everywhere, and it's just not the flow of it. When they did the medical side of the petition, it only allowed 35 licenses that first year, and they had to be separated out, at least one in each county.
Yep.
And I think that way they thought would address the issue. Reality was within the first year we didn't even have one.
Right.
It was just a poorly put together process by the administration.
It goes back to education again and again and again, and it's one of the things I've been railing about on my podcast on a regular basis. There is no public service announcement about the education about the product, about the fact that there are people out there that have improved their lives through the use of this product responsibly, not irresponsibly, but responsibly. There's no public service announcements giving people the opportunity to think about both sides of the argument. There's a lot of people are making up their opinions about this based on 80 years of propaganda and prohibition. If you dive into the education, you dive into some of the evidence and the research, the science that is available out there. By the way, there is something called the internet, and Google knows everything. You can just ask Google to learn about this product. But that also takes effort. I never see any or hear anything in traditional media, anything positive at all about the benefits of cannabis.
I think you have seen the Globe actually write articles.
Excuse me. I'm a electronic traditional media person, not a paper one.
Neither am I.
Okay, so I'm talking strictly television and radio here. Okay, more than print. Okay, because I think the Globe has done a great job. Look what they've done for crying out loud. They've started with one guy. Now they got like 5 or 6. They got a whole division because they realize that people are reading about it because that's how they're learning about it.
And I actually find that in the agencies that I ran, I would get interviewed by the media. And I found is that one station interviewed me on a story we were doing, and they wrote, "This is a great story. It's really nice to see what's going on." And I said, "I got to tell you something. There are more great stories like this than there are bad stories, but the media pushes the bad ones
because they're easier to find, and it also is sensational. It gets the most attention and that's human nature. We are intrigued with, hey, did you hear about this? As opposed to, have you heard what this product has done for this person? It's a big difference in the delivery of it.
But the media can be the.
They have to work harder, though. They have to work hard.
I mean, you look at CBD today.
Yeah.
You look at the success it's had under the hemp side. I mean, it's sold everywhere.
Right.
Now, that's legal nationally now, and you can move it through states through the
Farm Act is there. But you say it's legal, and it's not. You know that.
Well, it's there's a question relative to how the DEA schedules it. But you
can't infuse it in foods yet because
that you get into FDA issues, you get into DEA issues. Yep. But you do see
it's happening.
It's happening.
What do they say in law? There's the law, and then there's the reality of how people
are. I represent some hemp clients, and we looked at how we market it and so forth. Mm-hmm. And you can get letters from the FDA that they have given out to different hemp businesses, challenge. Well, you're calling it a drug. You can't call it a drug. You're calling it a food. How do you do it? Right. The reality is these letters are going out, but the FDA will tell you that.
How can they're not going to be able to control this thing?
They can't enforce it.
Right.
It's just they have so much else going on.
Right.
That we just can't enforce that. But I think you're looking at it. But Congress actually, with the latest farm bill, actually went in to address some of these issues because they said,
right, and then the guy left, right, the head of the FDA, I think, left, and now they're waiting for this public hearing to discuss more about, let's get some more clarity about this CBD thing.
But you look today.
Yep.
People using CBD.
Every day.
And the difference it makes.
Every day. Yeah.
And I have 90-year-old, every age. I was talking about it, and doctors, it's 90. You have people today, and this relates to cannabis in general.
Yep.
On the medical side,
that
when you do the polls, 90% of the people believe in it.
Yep.
If it was prescribed by a doctor,
right.
The numbers drop a little bit under the system we currently have.
Uh-huh.
But the numbers are so high on the medical side.
Yep.
And the numbers on the rec side are still above 50 nationally.
Right.
Because people say, what is the big deal anymore?
Right. Well, it's certainly going to be
you know,
more of a little deal.
It's
you know?
funny. A former commissioner of Boston, after cannabis became legal for adult use, he said to one of the commissioners at the CCC, saying, "I'm smelling it more than I ever did before." And I said to the commissioner, I said, "I got to tell you something. I don't know where he's been. I've been smelling cannabis since the 70s. And that's because of my age. I would have smelled on Boston Common.
That's right.
This has nothing to do with it being legal.
Does anybody remember the bleachers in the 70s at Fenway Park? I just want to say, I think we all do.
I mean, so to say that you see that it's not true.
It's out there, though. Look, when people see, hey, it's legal now. And this leads me to the next discussion point.
Oh, we have other discussions.
Oh my God, I think you're going to like this. The mentality of the 70s, when people used cannabis, it was used as a counterculture act of civil disobedience because you had a tricky guy in the White House named Nixon who, didn't want to get rid of those hippies and those other colored people, are using that stuff, is what he said, right? And he's the one who put the Controlled Substances Act going. I think it was 71. And so as a person of the 70s, I protested the war, and I protested anything that the establishment told me I couldn't do.
I think you're still doing that, aren't you?
I took 10 years off, but yeah, I do still do that. Okay, anyway, now I have my medical card. Now I use it medicinally and all that. But my point was, that was the culture. That's how it all began. And now that it's legal, Walter, you're seeing some of that illegal mentality drive the illegal market.
It's interesting that you mentioned Nixon, is that you can look at the other side of Nixon in the sense of, as a result of Watergate,
yes,
and so forth, you see how the media and the general public actually look at government today. They challenge.
Oh God, yes, because
they're not afraid to challenge. And so
right.
I think he did both. One, he set up a false war.
Yep.
And it wasn't aimed at anything.
We've had other presidents, by the way, have done the same thing.
Right. But you look at
a lot
as a result
earlier.
of Watergate.
Yep.
You look and say, "Wow."
There are a lot of comparisons going on right now. I just want to say
there are. I'm kidding you.
Right.
You sit back and look at what's occurred. I mean, I grew up in the 70s. My playground was Harvard.
Yep.
We'd be running through the dorms, and I remember being in the dorms. Not saying I partake.
Well, hang on a second. You were in Boston College, and you were partying. You were hanging out in Harvard.
I was a young kid, but I remember we'd hang out with Harvard students.
Yeah.
And you could go into a dorm room, and there'd be a bowl full of pills in the middle of the table.
Oh my goodness! Yeah.
That was the 70s.
Right.
And it was the way it was.
Sounds like the locker room of the Red Sox too back then too.
Well, it's funny.
Not just the Red Sox, by the way.
What people think about when you talk about the Red Sox,
the Greenies.
in the sense of when baseball was a sport and not a profession,
mm-hmm.
players, and even other sports as well, they had coolers next to them.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, in the 60s or early 70s, two of the players, because you couldn't have Coors beer here,
right,
actually got a truckload delivered.
That's right.
Remember
that? That was a big deal. That was a big deal to have Coors in the 70s.
Yeah. And so, but you look back, these guys were drinking while they were playing.
Yeah.
I mean, poor Derek Sanderson, when
right.
you look, it's like
I run into him at the supermarket.
Transfusions after playing because they partied hard as
yes,
well.
They did. They played and partied hard. It was a completely different era back then. But go back to the fact that you've got this illegal market that is being fueled by the slow rollout of the legal market. I think that's what's been going on, and not just here, but in California too. That we have a little bit of an issue going on.
Well,
because of the slow rollout, the pricing, the taxation of it, and people are saying, you know what, I've been getting my weed from somebody for the last 30 years. I'm going to continue with him because I don't want to schlep to Leicester or wherever, to Northampton or wherever, because I can't get it in Boston. So I'm going to stick with what I got because I know it, I trust it.
Well, I think
even though they know they're getting it illegally now.
I mean, you mentioned California
mm-hmm.
in what we're doing here, but let me look at California first.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about the Cole Memorandum that allowed that
mm-hmm.
banks felt comfortable. We talk about the continuing resolution that keeps federal government from being able to investigate and prosecute people in states for marijuana prosecutions.
Mm-hmm.
But when you actually follow those in California, it was and somewhat still is a wild west.
In Humboldt County, it still is the Wild
Obama
West.
Administration is the one prosecuting people that were illegally selling marijuana under the guise that they were operating legally.
Right.
When the Justice Department went to prosecute them, the defense said, "Hey, wait a minute, you can't prosecute me. There's a continuing resolution saying you can't investigate and prosecute me because I'm doing this legally."
Right.
The district court judge said, "No, you have to prove to the court that you're doing it legally." The Ninth Circuit, the most liberal of our appeals circuits, found it the other way around. They said, "No, it's government's point." And the reason why I just bring that up is that you saw in California a lot of things happening. You saw the issue: federal government requires you to be, even though it's illegal in general, 1,000 feet away, or you get an enhanced penalty. California just didn't care, and so you saw threats by the federal government saying you really should move your business because you're too close.
Mm-hmm.
Now you come to Massachusetts. We'll start with medical first. We put 500 feet out there.
Mm-hmm.
Some towns could go more, some could go less. But I think the federal government looked at it is that we were much more thoughtful on how we put it together. Now you look at the Cannabis Control Commission. Yes, it's taking a while, but the best way to look at it, okay, you're thinking this takes a while? They actually hit their numbers when they were supposed to be going, their dates. If you look at the Gaming Commission, and they do a great job, but if you look how long it took us to get the expanded gaming up and running, incredibly long time. You compare those two agencies, you have a Gaming Commission that had, not faulting them at all, it's just that had other states to look at in passing regulations and so forth. You have a Cannabis Control Commission that really had to create from scratch because there really wasn't anything out there to really work with. Mm-hmm. I mean, all in all, I think they're doing a good job. I think, do we need more stores faster? Yes, but it's moving forward the way it is. I mean, you can't necessarily say it's a slow rollout. I think they're thinking it through.
Why can't you say it's not a slow rollout? They had actually hoped to get 4 per month, and they've not come close to that. I think it's like 2.5 per month is their average.
I don't. You'd have to ask them specifically what the reason is. I mean, you can't. And one of the things that the chairman said over a year ago is that, look, we're doing everything to meet the timelines.
Right, I know.
But the reality is, it's not. It's important to do it right more than meet the timeline. And they're sticking with it.
Yes.
And I think the reality is, you look at the price to get a license. It was $50,000. You had $500,000 in a bank account in order to be able to get a medical marijuana dispensary vertically integrated. Who can get into that business?
Right.
$15 million or more. You look at the Cannabis Control Commission, it's $300 an application and a $3,000 a year fee. I think they're doing it to allow others to get into the business. And they're doing it saying, this is what it's going to cost us to regulate this industry. Because that's what the fees should be based on. Not about making money, because that creates a tax. It should be about what it costs us to regulate the business we're going to be in. And the chairman believes that the figures he's coming up with can pay for regulating this industry and taxpayers not having to pay for it.
Yeah, and when I talked to Steve Hoffman before NECAN, I asked him about the social equity issue, and he was very adamant about saying he really thinks that this has to come from the private sector. And interestingly enough, today I read from our friends at the Boston Globe, that Theory Wellness of Bridgewater is going to be offering $100,000 zero-interest loan to an entrepreneur for a term of 3 years, as well as $150,000 worth of inventory for which the entrepreneur will only pay once it is sold. So here is an example of a private industry person here, Theory Wellness, a licensee holder, is trying to help get some of these social equity people involved in the business.
The industry doing it, yes.
The industry is doing it themselves.
That's different than private. Because
I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying.
Because the distinction is
right.
The industry is doing this, and it's the right thing to do. Take a portion, because there's also contained what you see some of the applicants coming up with and contain the regulations is that they'll give 1% of their revenues into a fund that will help fund these programs.
Right. So that's good.
Now you look at the private sector in general. People are looking to make money. They'll invest. Money doesn't discriminate. It's all the same color.
Right.
They'll invest to anyone who has a good plan in place.
I know. I'm working on that.
Right, and I think the thing comes out to be is really working with people to help them put together plans, doing training. You have the Small Business Association. There are groups out there to help you and help them move forward. But you also have private people that are looking for a much bigger return. We saw in the medical side, we saw loans at 18%.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them were even higher. In Massachusetts, we don't have a usury law, so to speak. And a usury law is that if you charge 20% or more interest, that's illegal.
Gotcha.
What we do have is that if you charge 21% or more interest and don't register with the Attorney General's office, you're in violation.
I see.
So you see the market. And part of it is that people loan money based on risk.
Right.
If the risk is higher,
right,
the return is higher because they put risk out there.
Mm-hmm.
But you also see, as this industry grows, the risk is going away a little bit. And that becomes an issue, is that do you really need interest that high?
Mm-hmm.
What's also fueling this, because you mentioned the black market and so forth, is that pricing. And that's become an issue, is that with not having enough businesses in place, and we're trying, the legitimate business is trying to develop a pricing, because you can find out pricing by going on the internet.
Yes, you can.
And that's how the legal industry is using to describe what the market rate is and what we can charge.
Right.
Because you got competition, whether it's legal or illegal.
Right.
You only can drop your price down so far.
Right.
But trying to work that out. And I think part of it is, and we saw in Milton, it's amazing the amount of money they were making in the house that they own.
Right. And by the way, if you're going to do something illegal and it has something to do with cannabis, Northern Herb is probably not the best name to be doing it under. You know what I'm saying?
No, just like you sit back and say,
how stupid are you really? I'm sorry, I'm not going to name her name, but 51-year-old woman, and again, until she's proven guilty, she's innocent and all this. But
well,
I mean,
you had
companies. It was just crazy.
I mean, you had companies, and I don't know, and you saw in the media saying it's a loophole. And it really wasn't.
It's not a loophole.
No, but you had companies saying, I'm going to deliver a can of Coke to you for $200,
and I'm going to gift you an ounce of weed.
And that's a loophole, and and they get away with it. That's not true. The statute was clear.
Right.
The regulations are clear. Whether direct or indirect.
Yeah, that's an indirect way.
And that's indirect. And so you sit back and say, wait a minute, this is.
But
not
until
a loophole.
somebody tells them they can't do it, the human element is going to say,
I'm going to push the envelope.
I'm going to try and push the envelope and see what I can get away with. The thing that really bugged me about this is that she had declared bankruptcy before, and that is bad because, you know what? Don't mess with the IRS. I just want to say. That's not who you want to. Don't mess with the IRS. They're going to get you one way or another.
How Al Capone went to jail.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. One thing we haven't talked about are social clubs. Where do you think this is going to end up? Social clubs. What's it going to look like? In I know they're working on it. And it's so difficult. Again, they want to get it right. They may not get it right the first time it goes out there, but they're also kind of afraid to just make a decision and see what happens.
Well, I think let's first start off that.
Yes.
You cannot smoke it in public.
You can't smoke cigarettes or drink in public
either.
Correct.
Anything.
Right.
No, you.
But we both know that happens.
No,
by the
but
way.
the reason because this goes to the reason for social clubs.
Yes.
Federally subsidized housing.
Yep.
Condominiums.
Yep.
Hotels.
Yep.
So you're pushing people out to the public.
Right.
We need to create clubs
where they can
in
go.
Areas that they can go.
Right.
Like anything else. And
like the hookah lounge, like the cigar bar. I mean, they're out there. They're out there.
Now, the Cannabis Control Commission is working on this. Sorry for keep going back to Cambridge.
Well, the other People's Republic.
Yeah, but Cambridge is looking at potentially moving a petition forward, a home rule petition, that would allow to create some type of open
smoking area.
Now, they don't want smoking because of whether it's cannabis
dangerous.
or tobacco.
Well, it's the flame that they're trying to avoid, but you can warm it up with a vape.
Right, but because I tell people would say, well, wait a minute, they can't vape, they can't dab. When you read the definition of smoking, it's a combustible material.
Right.
Vaping and dabbing are not combustible materials. They're heating a material up till it vaporizes.
Isn't that what a hookah does too, by the way?
That's what a hookah does.
Yeah, which I learned, by the way, at a store local here. I'll give them credit. I'll give Milk the out in Watertown. They explained that to me, and I was like, oh, because I've never been to a hookah lounge.
So that's what I explain to people. I said, no, smoke. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not harmful to you, because this is the big issue you're dealing with vapes, because kids are using that instead of smoking. It still contains nicotine.
Right.
Where are we going with this? But
right. The electronic cigarettes control nicotine. Yes. Okay.
And vaping still contains THC.
Correct.
But it's not a combustible.
Correct.
So you could vape and not impact someone else's health.
Correct. So you can vape and you can edibled, right? You
Right.
can. But so to me, that's a lounge, and there's plenty of products out there to partake in that.
I mean, remember from the alcohol side, you'd walk through the common. It's amazing what a good brown paper bag was on a block. Hey, and you have police departments saying, especially in the city, look at. If I stopped everyone for going through a red light, or if I stopped everyone for smoking, I'd be here all day.
Right.
Unless you're in my face, or unless you're doing some, for the most part, I'm not going to bother you.
Right. Well, they will say to you, "Do you know the law?" and ask you to put it out.
Yeah.
But which, by the way, is the right way to handle it. Because they don't want to write the ticket, they don't want to cite them, they don't want it because the
It's only a
courts
civil
don't want to
penalty.
deal with it. Right. It's like it's not worth it to anybody. But educating the public about the law is a right way to do law enforcement at that level.
And education doesn't happen overnight.
No, I know that.
And that's really, we're seeing this industry grow here. And I see, same as gaming.
Mm-hmm.
I see Massachusetts becoming the best practice.
They want to
that
be.
they're looking at, and you see it in gaming. We have game sense.
Yep.
We work hard. That not only can you self-exclude yourself from a casino or from gambling, but family members can do that.
Right.
We seem to regulate things that impact society, not impact us individually. And that's how we regulate alcohol, and that's the reason why we're regulating cannabis.
Yeah, and again, learn about it. Educate yourself. Experiment with yourself. You're self-medicating. This is what you do when you go out and you have a glass of wine. You are self-medicating with red wine.
And I'm sorry for now you got me going here.
Go ahead.
We look at, there was an issue of...
You do host a show.
Right,
You know how this works.
But we do look at, how we regulate things.
Yes.
If you want to talk about issues, talk about we're not regulating kids that go out drinking at night.
Yep.
They're drinking vodka and Red Bull.
Right.
Talk about two things: a high caffeine, a high alcohol.
Well, they also are drinking to get drunk, Walter, and that bothers me big time.
But those two. So instead of having a kid passing out,
right,
they're going. They're getting to a point where we're wired, but we can still drink.
Right.
If you want to talk about issues that can impact society and impact kids, there's a whole lot of things out there you can do. Now, the Cannabis Control, although I believe the Alcoholic Beverage Control Commission could probably do something. Say, look, you can't serve with Red Bull. We're not doing that. But here we are as a society,
right,
going after cannabis as if it's
the evil weed again.
I
know.
And
It's crazy.
I can say we have opiate addiction. We have kids dying.
Right.
And here we are. We're still focused on something that
Is
the polls show. It's like, let's just do it right. Let's
We're trying to do it right. And here's one of the things that I talk about, too, a lot when it comes to parenting and parenting your children. A lot of people, think about the kids. I love it when I hear parents say that. And I'm like, yeah, I'm a parent, too. I get it. Here's a great opportunity for you to talk to your kids about all the things that you as an adult are responsible for. And I'm talking about sex. I'm talking about alcohol. I'm talking about cannabis. I'm talking about caffeine. I'm talking about nicotine. You can now you have an opportunity to open up all these discussions with your kids and tell them about all of those products. Don't just single out one or two, because I guarantee you as a child that the one or two that you are eliminating is going to be the two that they're going to try. So you have to educate them about all of those things. And it's a parent's duty to do that. You brought this child, this living thing into the world. You give them unconditional love. Give them education. Talk to them about what they're going to have to face after age 18, 19, 20, 21, obviously being the magic one.
It's about responsibility. I did it when I ran the Alcoholic Beverage Control Commission. I did a training on consequences. There's consequence for every action, good consequences and bad.
Correct.
It all depends on what you do. You have a responsibility. If you decide to get intoxicated and drive, there's a consequence. Potentially, you're going to kill somebody.
And you're going to go to jail, and you're going to have to live with that for the rest of your life.
And the same, so there's all these consequences. And trying to teach kids that there are consequences. I grew up in an era, and you did as well, that you felt the consequence.
Yes, you did. And taking that away has been a real challenge for parenting. Right. We're laughing about this, right?
Yeah.
But taking corporal punishment away from Catholic schools, I'm going to throw them out there, okay? From other schools, it doesn't just have to be Catholics. I get that too. You take that away, how are you going to set the parameters? What are the consequences? Stick me in a corner for 2 minutes? Really?
Yeah. And I'm not saying you have to hit to be able to have.
No.
I mean, but that's in different eras that we grew up in.
By
That's the way it happened.
As a former ABC person, should it be 18?
I actually had this conversation this weekend.
Because it was 18 when I turned 18. I just want to say.
It was 21 originally.
Right.
Went down to 18.
And then I moved into Tufts University on my 18th birthday, and that was awesome.
So I stayed back a year.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
So
I'm not surprised,
I'll
though.
never forget. So I turned 18 right before my senior year in high school. I figured, I can go to bars after school.
Right.
I never did
in
high school, but it was amazing. It became 18, and then I don't know if you got caught in that on that window where it went to 20.
When I was 20, no, I
got
it
caught
kept
in
going.
that
By the way,
window
as I got older, the drinking age went up and up and up, and then when it became 21, I was 21.
But to deal with the 20.
I was born in 57, if you want to do the math.
So I'm 59, so I hit that window.
You're in the window.
But what I found is amazing, running the ABCC, there's always this, and you found this from colleges.
Yep.
Because what you see happen, and this goes back to the issue of responsibility and consequences, is that what you saw happening in universities, they would have loved the age to be reduced. And it's twofold. One, because you have kids coming to college for the first time.
Right.
And not necessarily knowing the consequences.
Again, education.
And
education.
So and I'll give you an example of that in a minute. And so college is now becoming the babysitter instead of just the educator. And college, that's not our job.
I know.
Parents should have trained them. So
but parents feel like I've got 2 jobs, I can barely make ends meet. Look, there's a lot of pressure. And by the way, that's with 2 parents under a household.
Right. And so the time I took over the ABCC, we had a freshman at MIT drink himself to death.
Mm-hmm.
He was going to fraternity.
Actually. Right.
And he's calling says, how do I do this?
Right.
And the problem is, beer and things, but when you drink distilled spirits, you can drink down same so fast and that it takes over your system.
And they drink it to get drunk, Walter. And that's half the problem.
And they're trying to go in. So at the time it was interesting. So that was MIT. Mm-hmm. Everything hit the fan then. And to listen to, and I'm not, the parents, thought it's just our society back then. I mean, the parents are devastated. Everybody's devastated.
Sure.
But, and I don't really graphic part, but that the coroner, when you open up a body from intoxication, poisoning, what you see. It's devastating on everybody.
Yep.
And and it's not funny. It's actually kind of sad. So at the same time, when I was there, we were actually following delivery trucks from liquor stores to see where they were going, and we'd follow keg trucks, catching them going to fraternities and so forth.
Not just fraternities,
right? Others, but we followed one truck to a fraternity at MIT.
Mm-hmm.
50 kids at that fraternity, 30 of them underage. We went into the fraternity. They had a full bar.
Of course they did.
And I'm not. It's just and I'm not blaming the. It's just its consequences. Is that dropping into 18? Does that help with the consequence? I don't know. It's about educating.
It really is.
Children learning about consequences.
In Europe, okay, alcohol, drinking of wine is introduced at a younger age in the family unit. They don't have some of the problems that we have in the United States with alcohol abuse. They don't, because they've educated their children about it from a young age.
It's part of your culture.
It's part of the culture. And with us, the culture part is the pushback. They're telling me I can't do it at this age, so I'm going to do it.
And partially I'm seeing my parents doing it.
Hello? And every child, every teenager wants to be treated like an adult, okay? And of course, well, they're not adults. Well, why don't we educate them? Because as we know, as adults, there are adults out there that are acting badly too, with the lack of education. And you've seen the tragedy. I've seen the tragedy. I've seen people die from alcohol. Okay, I have not seen anybody die from cannabis.
I mean, I've also, I'm going to take you back here for a minute. I've seen the tragedy on the war on drugs, and I'll give you an example. So, when I was at the AG's office,
Yep.
I would see the devastation that drugs have in urban neighborhoods, and I felt that whether you lived in Roxbury or whether you lived in Concord, Mass, your children deserve to be able to go out and play outside.
Yeah, safely.
And it wasn't.
And there are
about
creeps in Concord, and there are creeps in Boston too.
What I found, very much so.
Thank you.
What I found was that, as you know, dealing drugs or any illegal activity is illegal. So you can't do it in public.
Right.
So what you see happening is that, I developed a program called Operation Take Back Communities, and you need to work with the community. If government worked with the community just instead of coming in, hit a hammer, leave, and you guys deal with the issue, is that be a partner.
Right.
And what we found, the community likes that. And what I found was I'd go to communities in which there'd be an absentee landlord living somewhere else, had a number of units, never cleaned the bushes out. You could go into them and you'd find one door was steel versus the others all plywood. Isn't there something wrong there?
Sure.
And so under the law, it says that for forfeiture. So I did a lot of, if the property owner knew or should have known drug dealing was occurring, I can take your property away from you. So we started going after properties and helping communities and getting rid of some properties in Lynn, and the same thing happened in Brockton. They started knocking places down because, we got to deal with this. We got to make the neighborhood safer. And I found that worked. I found bar rooms. I had a bar room up in Lowell where they said, well, and we were doing the hearing at the ABCC. I was a prosecutor at the time, and the trooper's on the stand. And so the bar owner is defending himself, and the trooper's describing the drug deal that he's observing. Yep. And the owner's is like, wait, was that this one? And he said, no, that's the next night. This is the one. And what happens is they said, well, I'm not dealing drugs. I'm not doing anything wrong. It's my
business.
Well, you're just as much as involved.
Right. Well, it's like parents when they are serving underage kids in their house. They're the responsible people. They're the ones that their kids are putting at risk because they're drinking under the parents' roof.
So
who owns the building?
When I was running the ABC, I won't mention the towns.
Yep.
But on one weekend, there were two towns.
Mm-hmm.
One town, police showed up at a party, kids left. Girl hits a tree, kills her boyfriend.
Mm.
At the other party, the police show up and arrest everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Say, it's illegal. And the hard time that chief got of doing that, he just saved those kids' lives. And so I'd go around talking, saying, about this weekend, you got these parents complaining about picking their child up at the police station.
Right.
Well,
rather than picking them up at the morgue,
that parent that had to pick their son up at the morgue would do anything to be able to.
Absolutely.
And the issue is, and we're going off on this subject, to another town, a chief of police said to me, they had 11 high school deaths in 3 years of alcohol. And parents are saying, Chief, if come to my house, you can place them under arrest. He said, I have a group of parents show up because it's, they're having a party for the seniors. Saying, Chief, don't worry, we're only going to give them beer and wine. It's like, are you serious? What is going on? And that's alcohol.
Right.
Now now we have this issue of cannabis in the sense of, we made mistakes
with alcohol.
We made mistakes with cannabis. We made mistakes with gambling. But learn from those mistakes.
It's about education.
And it's about education, and it's about, there's good, as the yin and the yang.
Right.
It's out there. There's bad and there's good.
Right.
It's
make sure your kids make the right decisions.
And really, there's nothing wrong with having a glass of wine.
Moderation.
There's nothing wrong with having with having a joint before.
Right. Moderation. And by the way, you don't have to smoke the whole joint anymore. You just need one or two tokes, and you're fine. Thank you very much.
So it's funny. I have a friend. Good thing I won't mention names, but his nickname in college was Maggot.
Yeah.
And
Maggot. I know Maggot. No,
and he says, so he was going to well, honey, I'm going to relive my
My youth.
my youth. And so his friends came over. They brought something back from California.
Yeah.
And he took 2 hits.
Yeah. And he was
And
done.
he was done. He's like, he had to get rushed to the hospital. And he goes to the hospital, and the nurses are so, and I guess this happens a lot at Fenway as well, at the hospital there.
Yep.
Is you got the people going to Aerosmith and all these concerts, and they don't realize it's different today.
Oh, sure,
and
yes.
The nurses were somewhat laughing. Oh, there's the old Fogarty section.
Right.
What he said, I should have realized what I did back then. I just go cook up a storm. He said, I got out of the hospital. There was nothing wrong with me. It was anxiety, thinking there was.
Right.
He said, I went home and I started cooking like crazy. He said, that's what I did in the 70s.
Right. Well,
But you need to understand the product is different today.
And also the first aid. I'm really interested to talk to some nurses in emergency rooms about the use of CBD to control those who come in with too many edibles in them, and they're extremely high, and there is a way to bring them back down to earth. And I think that is definitely something, again, that needs to be told to the public, that it's a first aid tool. Have it here. Have
Now,
a 50
Someone that overdoses on cannabis
extra dose. I like that better.
doesn't need a shot of Narcan.
Correct.
Someone that overdoses on
They need
opiates.
they need a 50 milligram, Twinkie or whatever
Listen,
you could put in.
but
Or
you can't die from overdosing.
no,
on
you just
cannabis.
get no, you can't, and you can
might get
really
hungry.
sick. No, you can get really sick.
Yeah.
You can get dizzy. You can pass out. You can vomit. All of those things that we try to avoid.
You can die from overdosing on alcohol.
Yes, you can.
You can die from overdosing
Yes, you can.
on a lot of other things.
Yes. So this has been a really enlightening hour of conversation, I just want to say, Walter. I think we've brought everybody down to earth in so many ways. And yet, isn't that perfect that we're going into this holiday weekend now where we can go out and celebrate the fact that we're actually alive?
It will be interesting to read the Globe on Sunday when it talks about all the celebrations, and also the electronic media on what they do tomorrow and the parties they show up at, saying
It's going to be interesting to watch. But again, it's, use it responsibly, use it moderately, educate yourself, know exactly what you're putting in your body at all times. That's a really good way to go through life. Okay.
and that should be anything.
That's 100%. That goes across the board. And that includes,
Sugar.
eating to excess. Sugar, absolute caffeine. I mean, there's plenty of things out there. Be smart, make good decisions. Walter Sullivan, as usual, I love talking to you,
Jimmy,
man.
we had a great time again.
Let's do the In the Weeds thing at your place
my
next
place.
time. Is that cool?
And we can discuss how you became an entrepreneur getting into the weeds.
Yeah, we can. Yes, we can talk about that then. For Steve Helmuth, our director, executive producer, Joyce Gerber, I'm Jimmy Young. For Walter Sullivan, thank you so much for coming in
Jimmy.
today. And enjoy 420 responsibly. A happy Easter and a happy Passover to the whole world. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Enjoy it responsibly. Good night, everybody.